Good night, dear friends. For some, it's good night, for others, good evening, and for some, it's good day. I have titled today's topic as Armenians who created Turkey. Of course, I don't mean myself or Armenians who are still in the army or elsewhere. I am talking about geopolitics. I am talking about the ethnic group. To start today's broadcast, I want to begin with the official census of the Ottoman Empire from 1844. Year. This census was within the borders of modern-day Turkey. Let's refer to the official figures regarding ethnic groups. So, the so-called Turkish Muslims. I note that more than 80% of these Turkish Muslims are Armenian Greek mixed, with a predominance of the Armenian component of Ankara and a predominance of Greek and Anatolian. Local peoples, Koreans, Lydians, and so on, from Ankara to Istanbul. Meanwhile, in Afrakia is modern European Turkey, and Afrakia is modern Eastern Greece. The Armenian component prevailed over the Greek due to the resettlement of Armenian settlers by Byzantine emperors of Armenian origin. That is precisely why we are talking about Turkey today. The official census of the Ottoman Empire conducted by the Ottomans, not by Armenians or Greeks. What do we have? The estimated number of Turkish Muslims is given as 3 million people. 3 million, according to the census. I think this number needs to be increased. You see, I will increase it to 4 million. Based on those analytical articles that I have read, but the Ottomans account for 3 million. Armenians, followers of the Apostolic Church, the Ottomans, account for 2,400,000. That is, they account for 3 million Turks. I approximately accept the figure of 4 million, according to my estimates, and 2,400,000 Armenians of the Apostolic Church. Practically equal groups, right? Think about it. Keep in mind, I repeat once more, that the Turks from Ankara to the borders of modern Armenia, these are essentially the same Armenians who were either voluntarily or forcibly Islamized from the 11th to the 19th centuries. The most massive waves of Islamization occurred in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, when entire regions with Armenian populations, including villages and cities, converted to Islam. The fact is that Muslims had the right to bear arms. Muslims had the right to own land, and therefore such processes occurred in the state. So what do we have? The Turks? Let's consider 4 million people. In the census 3, Armenians, followers of the Armenian Apostolic Church, who were counted as Armenians. Millet, 2,400,000. It seems clear, but it's not like that at all. Armenian Catholics were not counted as Armenians of the millet. The head of the Armenian millet was the Armenian Patriarch of Constantinople. So, Armenian Catholics numbered 250, style 50, 1,000. Let's add 2,400,000 and 250,000. 2,650,000 people, dear friends. And the Armenians of the Greek Rite, the Hehorams, who inhabited Cappadocia. Cappadocia, from where the Armenian architect who made Turkey famous hails. Turkey's number 1, Mimar Sinan. We will return to this question as well. So, the number of Hehorams, Armenians of the Greek Rite, is 120,000 people. In total, we already have 2,770,000. Those who spoke the Armenian language, dear friends, in 1844. Let's move on. The number of Islamized Armenians, Alawites, Hemshils, Homshensi, Amshens, and including crypto-Armenians who practiced Islam and called themselves Armenians, including representatives of Kurdish tribes, of which there were more than 20 tribes, who at that time still spoke Armenian but called themselves Kurds. Demographers estimate this at 730,000 people. So let's add it up. Let's see what numbers we arrive at. This is very interesting. We arrive at a figure of 3.5 million, which exceeds the official number of Turks recorded by the Ottomans in the census, but is less than the figure of 4 million that I consider. So, 4 million Turks and 3.5 million Armenians of different confessions at various stages of assimilation. I am talking here about Islamized Armenians and Armenian Muslims. Next, who else lived in Turkey at that time? Orthodox Greeks. Within the modern borders, 1,200,000, significantly fewer than the Armenian population. Next, Muslim Greeks, numbering 150,000 people. These are the Rumi, these are the Pontians. Next, 1 million Kurds, also a significant number, but clearly not enough to have the Kurdish population that exists now. Kurds, a significant part of whom consisted of assimilated Armenians, who no longer represented Armenian Asherites. The assimilation of whom into Kurds occurred, again, in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, especially when there was a mass conversion and transition to Islam. Next, Jews, 100,000 according to the census. A large group, but not very big. Assyrians and Chaldeans, 300,000 people. A large group, undoubtedly. Arabs within southeastern Turkey, southwestern Turkey. Modern, yes, 200,000 people. A significant number, but not very large. As of 1844, Circassians and Black Sea Caucasians, about 150,000 Laz people, who were counted separately from Georgians, 100,000 people as of 1844, and other peoples, Roma, Slavs, Georgians, Albanians, 150,000. So who were the two main peoples of the empire? The two main ones are Turks and Armenians. These are the two main peoples. And the two largest peoples that followed them are Greeks and Kurds. But the two largest main ethnic groups that lived there are, undoubtedly, Armenians and Turks. I have provided this table in full detail in my Telegram channel in 2 versions, and you can find this table. Study it in principle. You will find it interesting because when I explain, it's one thing, but when you look at it, it's completely different. Now, regarding Armenia and Armenians within today's Turkey, what did the Turks call Armenia and how they wrote? If we take the territory from Sebastia to the borders of modern Armenia, including Erzurum, Ivan on Turkish but not Turkish, then Ottoman. On Ottoman maps, official general staff maps, they are all published, available on the internet. We live in a world now where it's impossible to hide digitized information. These are Ottoman maps. On this entire vast territory, half of Turkey, it is written Ermenistan. These are Turkish maps from the 19th century, maps of the Ottoman Empire. These are not Armenian maps, these are not Greek maps, these are Turkish maps. The territory of Ozeravan, Erzurum, Sebastia, all these territories, it is written Ermenistan. These are official Turkish maps. How can this be? Why is it not like this now? We understand why it is not like this now and why all of this is denied. The fact is that the maps, the main maps that describe the Ottoman territories of Turkey were compiled at the beginning of the 19th century by order of the Ottoman statesman Mehmed Emin Rauf Pasha an official order exists. There exists one of the prominent leaders of Turkey at that time, Mehmed Emin Rauf Pasha. And in 1802 and 1803, these maps were created. They are known to the global scientific community as the Atlas of Rauf. Can you imagine? The Ottomans wrote Armenistan. That's how it is, dear friends. Therefore, what is important about these maps is that they were developed by Ottoman, Turkish cartographers, not Armenians. Next, let's turn to the map of the General Staff of the Ottoman Empire. At that time, there was the Ministry of War, an official structure of the Ottoman Empire. And there is a map from 1877, dear friends. What is written on this map? Armenistan. Across all of Eastern Turkey, which is now called Eastern Anatolia. The name is absolutely brilliant. Anatolia translates to East. Eastern East, to avoid using the word Armenia. Everyone in the Ottoman Empire knew what the Ottoman Empire consisted of conquered Greek and Armenian territories. And then, at that time, this was openly written about. There you go. But from the end of the 19th century, with the Armenian massacres that took place at the end of the 19th century and continued by the new elite of Turkey, the Young Turks, yes, many of them were not Turks. A decision was made to establish a nation state because the Ottoman Empire was a multinational state of the Ottomans. Everyone who served this empire faithfully were Ottomans, including Armenians. Subtitles made. And with this aim, the cleansing of the territory began. That is, the extermination of Greeks and Armenians. This is what happened. Therefore, the genocide of 1915 is also the first genocide of the 20th century. Turkey, naturally, rejects the accusation of the mass extermination of Armenians and reacts very painfully to this issue. But right now, we are talking about the realities of world politics, about how it really was, and what contribution, based on Turkish archival data, did the Armenians make to the formation of the Ottoman Empire. If I were to talk about this contribution continuously, even 10 years wouldn't be enough for me. I will simply take some contexts. Based on Turkish archives, which every representative of the Caucasian Turkmen tribes, including every Turk who knows the Russian language, can verify. There are no secrets here. All this data is still available in Turkish information databases, dear friends. Armenians were essentially the elite titular nation within the Ottoman state, and they helped create this Ottoman state. They laid the foundations of architecture, medicine, linguistics, economics, art, diplomacy, and civil service. The Armenian influence is so profound that it is fair, completely, and you will agree with me to assert that modern Turkey has entirely grown on an Armenian foundation. There you go. I'll even say more. In fact, considering that, obviously, if demographic trends continue, then Turks and Kurds will remain the last white people on this planet, and will continue the Armenian gene. As strange as it may seem. So, the Armenian foundation of Turkey. Let's just go through it. I will also recall my closest relatives. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gabriel Nuratunkian. The Minister of Finance, Tavitian. Here are my father's second and third cousins. So, Artin Dadyan Pasha was a childhood friend of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Artin Dadyan not only held the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Ottoman Empire, Pasha, an openly Armenian. He was not just the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he was a person who is called a diplomat who most effectively defended the interests of the Ottoman Empire and who is actually the founder of the famous Turkish diplomatic school. Read, dear Terekeme, Azerbaijanis, and those Turks of Akasha who are descendants of Armenians, but do not know about it. Read in Turkish from open sources. Who was he? Artin Dadian Pasha? That's one. Next. Hakob Kazazian Pasha, Minister of Finance of the Ottoman Empire, creator of the financial system of the Ottoman Empire. Can you imagine how it was? Moreover, he was the Minister of the Secret Treasury. During the reign of Abdul Hamid II, he officially received the title of Pasha and the highest awards from the Sultan for the most extensive reforms in the history of the Ottoman Empire, aimed at reducing expenses, attracting loans, and easing debt payments. Can you imagine? And do you know what happened after the death of Kazaziana Pasha Gakop? The Minister of Finance became Mikhail Portugal. Pasha, also an Armenian, who continued these reforms. How does that work, right? There you go. Next. And do you know who is the founder of the Ottoman Red Crescent? Peshtimalchan Pasha. Can you imagine? Also an Armenian. He held the position of chief advisor to the imperial palace of Abdul Hamid for the longest time. Everything is verified in the archives. This is especially relevant for the illiterate descendants of nomads, who have no archives at all. And I'm telling you everything based on Turkish archives. Can you imagine? I'm telling you all of this. When it's based on Western archives, I will also tell you about that. Everything is verified. Only archival materials, specific names, surnames, positions. It's impossible to invent who was a minister and their contribution, you understand? All these ministers are listed. Let's move on. Kazazartin, Amirbedzan, established the first hospital in Turkey and led its construction. The first hospital, the first medical school, Artin Amirbedzan. This is medicine. I spoke about politics. In politics, you know, I recently looked at a list of more than 800 names of senior leaders of Turkey, military and political, Armenians. This was the case before the Young Turks from Salonika came to power. Before the Young Turks arrived from the city of Salonika, whom the Armenians helped to come to power, and who organized the Armenian Genocide. Let's continue to look further. And do you know who founded the School of Urology and the first urology department in the Ottoman Empire? Do you think it was a nomad from central Anatolia? No. It was Nafilian, Anton Pasha. Check the archives to see who he was. In 1870, Nafilian Anton Pasha was appointed as the chief physician and the first surgeon of the military hospital of Haydar Pasha. I'll tell you more. Haydar Pasha comes from the Armenian Hemshin, Armenian Muslims of the Black Sea coast. Well, let's move on. I want to tell you that thanks to the efforts of Nafilian Anton Pasha, the Turkish army had the fewest casualties. More precisely, the fewest wounded soldiers died during the Russo-Turkish War among Ottoman soldiers. Can you imagine how much he didn't like the Turks, yet he achieved the highest recovery rates in the world for Ottoman soldiers? Didn't like, I put in quotes. Well, there's a lot to say about medicine. Again, dozens of names of great people. There isn't enough time for even one broadcast. My dear friends, let's move on to the architecture and urban planning of Turkey. If we list all the architectural masterpieces constructed by Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, it would be necessary to write more than 100 books, which is impossible within the scope of a broadcast. The main gates of the Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul, where my great-great-grandfather Deliarten Bey, Mikhailian, visited multiple times. His portrait was painted by the French artist Monet in my family's palace in Constantinople in 1848. These are my ancestors. And if I go to Turkey, you know, the Turks say, "What a Turkish face you have." Interesting, right? Do you know why? Because the Turks have our faces, the faces of Western Armenians. That's why it is so. Therefore, in any Turkish restaurant, because I am a classic Turk to them, I am served first. In Germany, for example, let's move on. So, Dolmabahce. Let's check the Turkish archives. Who built Dolmabahce? Turkish archives. Karapet Balyan. A great Armenian architect from the Balyan family. Can you imagine? We read Turkish books. No Armenian sources. You see, that's all. I refer you to look at Turkish sources. This is especially useful for the descendants of Turkmens and Armenian Muslims, who now call themselves Azerbaijanis. And wouldn't you like to look at the maps printed in the Vatican, which show Armenian villages that were Islamized in Azerbaijan? Yes, there were also those who independently adopted Islam. You would be surprised at how many people in modern Azerbaijan are genetically Armenian. So things are not very simple there either. So Dolmabahce, Dolmabahce, the Dolmabahce Palace, the largest in Turkey, dear friends. It was built from 1842 to 1853. Do you know who designed it? Karapet Balyan. The construction was carried out by him and his son, Nikogos Balyan. It's all in the Turkish archives. Read them. You see, much could not be destroyed or burned. They tried. But if you completely erase the Armenian trace from Ottoman history, there would be no Ottoman Empire at all. It would be zero, just zero. Moving on. This is an outstanding palace of world-class level. It combines Baroque, Rococo, and Neoclassicism. Do you know what area it covers? 45,000 square meters. It is adorned with 14 tons of gold. And it costs more than 5 million gold pounds. Let's move on. You do love Turks. I'm not talking about the Turks of Central Asia. They have nothing to do with these stories in a good way. I'm talking about the Turks of the Caucasus. You admire Constantinople, Istanbul, the Ortaköy Mosque which you visit. Do you know who built it? Read the Turkish archives? In 1853, Ortaköy was built by someone named Balyan. Yes. It looks, the mosque, like an exquisite palace. Minarets of white marble, large windows reflecting the Bosphorus. This mosque, do you know who painted it the most? This mosque? The great Armenian marine artist, Ayvazovsky, whose paintings adorn Comrade Erdogan's office. That's right. Next, there is the city of Edirne. Edirne. Correct. Yes? In Thrace, not far from Istanbul, Constantinople. Istanbul is also a Greek word. Read up on it. Comrades, geniuses in quotes. The Selimiye Mosque. This is the pinnacle of Mimar Sinan's work. I'll tell you right away why Mimar Sinan is Armenian and not Greek or anyone else. There is a preserved petition from Mimar Sinan to the Turkish Sultan requesting protection for his Armenian relatives who were being evicted from Kayseri. Yes, he is originally from Kayseri, where lived Armenians of the Apostolic Church, believers, and Armenians who believed in the Greek Church. There you go. So it has been preserved. Can you imagine? Regarding Open the Archives. Go to the available archives and read what is written there. The Selimiye Mosque is the pinnacle of Mimar Sinan's creativity. Aren't you proud of this as Turkish architecture? Well, Turkish architecture, specifically Turkic, is the architecture of tents and barns for. Just saying, well, that's just so you understand. You know that the mosque, Selimiye, is the main masterpiece, one of Islamic architecture. Read the Turkish archives, my illiterate ones. I'm speaking to those who don't know this. The origin, mosques, and Meimara. Sinan, it was of course hushed up. In the 1940s in Turkey, even Sinan's skull was exhumed to prove his Turkic origin. You understand, right? Brilliant. But the archival documents. And then it turned out, when they measured Sinan's skull, that it belonged to an Armenoid. And the skull immediately disappeared after that. Thank you. That's why there is no head in Sinan's tomb. Do you understand the situation? This is what a fake state is. When they made it, there is hardware in the computer and software. So, the Armenians' hardware had their software changed. This is modern Turkey, just so you understand. For many Armenians, this is very difficult to comprehend. That modern Turkey is Armenia. With a different language, which was created by Armenians, I will talk about this. In a modern form like the alphabet, and with a different Islamic content, not Armenian. But once Armenians had different content, dear Armenians. Armenians believed in their own gods. For example, in Aramazd and Anahit. And now they believe in our Lord Jesus Christ. The hardware remained the same, the software changed, dear friends. The Süleymaniye Mosque, which is visited by all, admiring Muslims from all over the world. The largest religious building in Istanbul, built by Mimar Sinan between 1550-1557, dear friends. Besides the mosque, the complex includes a madrasa, library, observatory, hospital, kitchens, shops, and a hammam. The history of Turkey continues, all according to Turkish archives. Medresinger, minaret in Konya. This is a masterpiece of Seljuk architecture. Who built it? A masterpiece of Seljuk architecture according to Turkish archives, by the Armenian architect Gallust in 1251. Can you imagine? Before him, this madrasa, before Gallust the Armenian, where the Turks learned Islam, the Turks, right? The education took place in tents. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? In the same place where I recently published photos, representatives of the Karapapak Tarekeme lived until recently. In the territory of the eastern part of the Armenian highlands. It was Gallust who founded the architectural style that was later called Seljuk. Read not Armenian sources, read World Science. It's all written there. Next. The Armenians from the Balyan family. What else built practically the entire Istanbul, which you are proud of and which should be a source of pride for? Humanity? The Beylerbey Palace, Yildiz Palace, Siragan Palace, barracks, churches, bridges, the mint, dams, buildings of the Istanbul Technical University. Armenian architects literally built the entire Istanbul. In 2014, 11 years ago, in the Turkish Museum of Architecture, can you imagine, an online exhibition was opened dedicated to Armenians. It was called as such, as the creators of palaces and key buildings of the Ottoman Empire. Can you imagine? It was organized by Turks, not Armenians. Yes, that's how it happens. Let's move on. And who is this? Akop? Martayan Akop Delyachar? This is an Armenian linguist who invented and proposed the surname Ataturk. Read Turkish sources. He is the creator of the Turkish alphabet in Latin script. That's how it's written in Turkish sources. The creator of the Turkish alphabet in Latin script. Do you know why? Because the first Turkish books were printed using the Armenian alphabet. That is, the alphabet was Armenian, but the language was Turkish. And then he created the Turkish one. Then there was Arabic, simultaneously with Armenian, and he created it in Latin script. This is all Turkish history, written by Turks, which I am telling you about now. I repeat once more, for the less educated. Hagop Martayan Hagop Dilachar, an Armenian linguist who proposed the surname Ataturk, creator of the Turkish alphabet in Latin script, leader of the main and only language reform of the 1930s, was fluent in 27 languages. Moving on. And who was Bedros Kerestesian? Dear friends, read Turkish history. The author of the first comprehensive Turkish dictionary, the year 1891. I suggest to the less educated and the clueless to find the first Turkish comprehensive dictionary, the year 1891. Read who wrote it, and you will see that it was Bedros Kerestesian. Can you imagine? And you know what happens when you meet with the less educated Armenians influenced by Soviet power. You still manage to talk about something. But I am a direct blood descendant of those people who owned palaces in Constantinople, who created this empire. I am their descendant. And I know all of this. Unlike those who were attempted to be made into a new people. But nothing will work. The Armenian gene will return. I'm talking about Armenians. Let's move on. Did you know that Bedros Kerestesian compiled all the Turkish idioms, all the Turkish proverbs, noted all the grammatical features of the Turkish language, and now in Azerbaijan, all of this is being used? In Azerbaijan, they use the Turkish alphabet in Latin script, which was created by Akop Deliakar, all Armenians. Don't you hate so much? Armenians. Can you imagine how much you use that Armenians have created? Wherever you turn, even when you get into an MRI machine. And it was invented by an Armenian. Read about who invented it. Don't use MRI, probably. Let's move on. And who is Jeremiah Q. Murchin? This is the person who founded the first printing house in Constantinople. The first in the territory of the Ottoman Empire in 1677. Can you imagine? He printed books in the Armenian language, including in Armenian letters in Turkish, in Arabic, and in Hebrew. See how it works? And who is Edgar Manas? Pay attention. Listen, all Azerbaijanis who stand up and Turks. Edgar Manas, an Armenian composer, is the author of the orchestration of the Turkish national anthem. Edgar Manas, the Turkish national anthem. Do you understand, fools, what Armenophobia means and how little you know about history? Let's move on. And who created theater and opera in the Ottoman Empire? Well, Tigran Çukagian, like me, Tigran wrote the first operatic works and staged the first performances, and thus founded theater and opera. Specific names, check them. Yes, who is this? Martiros Navazan and Gabriel Beşiktaşlıyan, the founders of theater and opera in the Ottoman Empire. Can you imagine? All Armenian publishers, since they published newspapers in the Turkish language, and the educated, intelligent Ottomans already referred to the uneducated peasants living in small plots in Anatolia as Turks. Those who are now Turks, the Turkish intelligentsia, the leaders, they called themselves Ottomans, and they read, everyone knew, the Armenian alphabet. Not everyone knew the Armenian language because newspapers were printed in Armenian letters. Can you imagine? Even on Turkish money. And money cannot be counterfeited. They circulated throughout the Ottoman Empire. There were inscriptions in Armenian letters and in the Armenian language, not just in Turkish. Furthermore, did you know that Armenians founded the first sports clubs in Turkey? Armenians were the first winners of the first Olympics on behalf of the Ottoman Empire. and the role of Armenians in the economy and trade. Can you imagine with what money Turkey and some other countries were built? In 1914, according to global economic statistics, 80% of all industry and trade in the Ottoman Empire was controlled by Armenians. 80%. The fact is, do you know what was the most elite product of the Ottoman Empire that was sent to Europe? I'll tell you. Armenian carpets from Izmit, the city of Izmit. This was an elite product, not only in the Ottoman Empire, but was #1 in Europe overall. And do you know about the largest network of elite hotels at that time, Tokatlian, which was created by Ottoman Armenians? Dear friends, and once again, remember Persia. Do you know how many large Armenian cathedrals were operating before the genocide? In Istanbul, there were 47. In 1914, there were 67 schools in Istanbul, and 158 daily Armenian newspapers were published. Where are these Armenians who made up 30% of the city's population? Open the archives, they are nowhere to be found. Only a few, like me, descendants of those who managed to survive, are still alive. That's approximately how it is, dear friends. Modern Turks, in their critical majority, are 85 to 90% descendants of Armenians. I am sequentially moving on to the greater contribution of the Greeks. You know, the Turkic component is only linguistic and cultural, but for Azerbaijanis, this percentage is higher. There, the Turkic component is 20. There are groups where it is 10. There are groups where it is 25, but for the Turks, there is no Turkic component at all. It is at the level of 1–2%. It is only linguistic and cultural. It is not biological. 0. Biology. 0. There is a small amount of biology in the Uyghurs. Kyrgyz and Kazakhs, whom Erdogan brings in, accepts. That's the only Turkic they have left. There, dear friends, are geneticists. And are there genetic studies? Global ones. I will tell you more, Turks are identical to Armenians. Even if this doesn't please the Armenians, among others. And they have no relation to the peoples of Central Asia. Science says this, there's nothing to be done about it, whether someone likes it or not. Therefore, Armenians were not any minority in the history of Turkey. Armenians are the founders, reformers, architects, diplomats, military figures, artists, doctors who built the entire cultural and intellectual foundation of the Ottoman Empire and modern Turkey. Their contribution was key, systemic, the most extensive and deeply rooted in all spheres of life, from architecture to medicine to diplomacy, language, trade, military affairs. Such is the history, dear friends, interesting. Can you imagine how everything works? Right? How deep is everything? And how open everything is? All based on Turkish archives, can you imagine? Practically everything, nothing else. And if you use everything, and do you know what a key role the founder played? For example, Ara Güler, in the creation of, in general, globally documenting Turkish heritage. He recently passed away. Ara Güler, he was a great man who loved Turkey, do you understand? That's the thing. Dear friends. So, study history, study it. History and the garbage that is in your heads are completely different definitions. So different that you can't even imagine how much they differ from what was. You all live in a fake world, a world of lies and falsehoods. Someone created this world. You know, I'll say even more. It wasn't created by ordinary Turks or even ordinary Azerbaijanis. Because they simply, in a good sense, thank God, were not capable of creating such a perverted world. Armenians were killed and robbed. Armenians were destroyed, expelled. That's what happened. Thanks for everything. And this happened with the rise to power of the Young Turks. Then they say, why did Armenians live so well? And then, well, Armenians themselves, these Young Turks, they didn't have military forces. These were quite poor officers, without money, without support, from the Greek city of Thessaloniki. That's how it is, dear friends. The fact is, do you know how the Turks recorded music? With Armenian kazis, notes. And do you know who invented them specifically for the Turks? Separate kazis. Read the Turkish archives, right? An Armenian composer and musicologist who lived at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. There you go. His name was Hambarzum Limajan. This is all the Turkish music that you love. There you go. And do you know what it's called in Turkey in Turkish sources? I highly recommend the less educated to read. It's a Turkish term. Gambartsum Natasi. Can you imagine? Right? Hambarzum's notes. It's a scientific term among the Turks. Yes. Where can you go with this? Nowhere. Hardly anyone besides me can tell you this, but I have many students. We created an Armenian encyclopedia, an encyclopedia of European civilization. It is in the description of this video. You can subscribe. Learn the true history. We have created 3 courses. School of Geopolitics, special courses. School of the History of the Armenian World. You can enroll using the description of this video and on the Telegram channel. We have done a tremendous amount of work. We managed to do it, and I have a lot of followers. I could actually do nothing more because, in fact, I am doing nothing. I am working. The projects I created have been functioning since 2007, and a large number of young Armenians are participating in them. Well, that's how it is. So when you approach the first madrasa again, the main educational institution where Turkish Islam was created, always remember that I told you it was built by Galust, an Armenian architect who created and lived in Konya. Think about it. And that's why. Do you understand why Turkish Seljuk architecture is identical to Armenian now? Can you imagine? So always remember. Ince Minare, Dolmabahce Palace. Naturally, other buildings, of which there are an incredible number. That's the point. So, please remember what Refik Ahmed, a Turkish historian and theater expert, wrote. He is Turkish. He wrote that the creator, the first creator of Turkish theater, Turkish plays. This is written by the main Turkish art historian. Yes, it's the wooden sword, Don Gregorio, which was staged in 1857 year. And it was staged by Srapion Ekimyan, an Armenian who did this. In Turkey, everything was created by Armenians. Imagine what a country. It couldn't have been otherwise. Turkey grew on Armenian land. That's the point. That's how it is. And did you know that in 1856, the Turkish government banned Armenian theatrical performances because all the Turks only attended Armenian theatrical performances. Sropian began giving performances only in the Turkish language, and he was allowed to. Yes, dear friends. Yes, that's how things are. Study, think, remember Abgar Tokatetsi, who created the first printing press in 1567, the first books in Arabic script, and in the Armenian language, which Turks could read because they were written in Turkish, were there. Do you know how many printing houses, the largest major printing houses, there were in Constantinople that were Armenian? 25? And do you know how many there were in the territory of the Ottoman Empire? Printing houses? 620. Publishing houses. There's nothing left. Where did the Armenians go? They must have evaporated. That's how they developed the Ottoman Empire. They printed dictionaries. They developed and engaged in the enlightenment of the Turkish people. That's the point. Dear friends, that's the kind of history Turkey has, just so you understand. The authority of Armenian doctors was so high, they made up the majority of doctors in the Ottoman Empire, that they received the highest orders and awards of the Ottoman Empire. They held the highest positions in politics, military Armenian doctors. That's how it worked, dear friends. That's how it worked. Agricultural affairs. Who started the agricultural business in Turkey? Do you know what his name was? Read Turkish books. Jacob Amasyan. Correct. And who? This is the founder of the higher agronomic school of the Ottoman Empire. Dear friends. And who? The major figures. You know, only Armenian surnames. In the agricultural sector. Who created it and who are still in Turkey today. Check it. Hov Hanestu Sezyan, Karapet Sirunyan, Gevorg Strimarjan. Can you imagine? Armenians were opening dozens of agronomic schools, agricultural credit organizations in the Ottoman Empire. They established experimental gardens, vegetable plots, everything that exists in Turkey. I continue again, so you understand. Do you know how many members there were in the Chamber of Commerce of Constantinople, the main Chamber of Commerce? 15 people. Do you know who led the Chamber of Commerce? Who created it? Aristokis Azarian. So there were 5 Turks, 5 Greeks, and 5 Armenians. And the head was an Armenian in the 16th, so you understand how it worked. Can you imagine? You talk about cuisine, about dolma. Read what the Turks write about the origins of Turkish cuisine and where all these dishes came from. Read what the Arabs say, where Lamachan came to them from. Where did subarek, the Armenian peasant dish, come from? Read about it, think about it. It is truly all very interesting. And remember that the first global concert and the first opera on the territory of Turkey, which was called Arshak II. Arshak II was a great Armenian king. It was staged and written, presented in the main hall of Constantinople. This is the first Turkish opera, Arshak II. Check the Turkish source. Both written and staged. It was by Tigran Çukarjian, the Great, and Tovmas Tigran in 1868. Thus Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, was introduced to music. By the way, did you know this is the first opera in the East, in the entire Middle East with its great culture? Interesting, isn't it? So, when you read these materials in Turkish, remember again who created this alphabet. Akop Dilyaka. Martayan. Who, after singing a song about the Armenian hero Andronik, but this is for the ignorant Armenians, in the presence of Kemal, who asked what his favorite song was, he sang about the great Andronik. Kemal did nothing to him. He was forgiven for this, just so you understand. Who was Akop Gelachar? These are the ones who write, questioning why he did this for the Turks. Learn more so that you understand more in life. I can provide you with such facts for many hours. Armenians and non-Armenians. You can only manage life by being literate. This applies to everyone. Armenians, Turks, Kurds, Azerbaijanis. You will be able to stop killing each other and become friends when you start building a civilization. It pains me greatly that, genetically, Turks and Armenians, being one people, are in a state of severe confrontation, and Turkey views Armenia as the main enemy. The fact is that a significant portion of Azerbaijanis, about 25% Azerbaijanis from most of Nakhchivan, Ayrum Azerbaijanis, Absheron Azerbaijanis, who were formerly Armenians, later became Tats after Islamization, and only a part of the Armenian Tats remained Christians, and then became Azerbaijanis. Azerbaijanis of Shirvan, who are Armenians. What is happening is hostility. And inevitably, someone has to destroy someone else, writing nonsense and foolishness. And many of those who laugh at the great Armenian culture are laughing at the graves of their Armenian ancestors who created this culture, because there is no other culture on your lands except for the Greek one. And fragments of other cultures without influence. You speak of Caucasian Albania, Luang. And thanks to what was this state created? Caucasian Albania. Who brought civilization there? Who was the elite there? What faith were the Albanians? Who united these 26 diverse tribes? Yes, dear friends, that's how it works. Think, learn, subscribe to the Armenian Encyclopedia, support the scholars. Links are in the video description. Join the projects. Get an education. Projects created by the team I am part of, which I am very proud of. You can do all this on the Telegram channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. I hope you found it interesting. Try to verify everything that is said. Everything I told you is found in Turkish sources. Once again, thank you very much for watching me, and soon we will reach the milestone of 100,000. The world presented to us is largely deceitful and distorted. This is the worst that can be. And the forces that pit nations against each other do so to control these nations. And this includes Turks, Armenians, Kurds, and Azerbaijanis. That's it. Therefore, get an education, so that you are not controlled. Thank you, and all the best. Thank you.